Welcome to the future we need and how to get it. Tonight we conclude our 7-part series looking back to see where we've gotten and forward to where we may go next, to consider together what we can do. The remainder of this century is going to be extraordinarily difficult everywhere, probably the most difficult our species has ever endured, if we do endure, and there is no avoiding that. But our future is not hopeless, far from it. Our belief that it is hopeless, however, no matter how deeply hidden from even our own view that belief may be, is in the end the greatest single weapon that those running the world into destruction today have to rely on. It means no serious effort to unseat them will ever be launched, just so long as they can keep us all mesmerized with our deepest doubts, with our unnamed but widely held belief that being realistic means, in effect, taking side bets on the future, ever up in the bleachers, wringing our hands, or at the most holding aloft signs urging victory, but never down on the field playing our hearts out. All else may thus turn on just this. Let us take back the word realistic. Let's reclaim it and put it back to work. Right now, to be realistic is to assume the worst about our world and about ourselves. It is necessarily negative. It justifies replacing the pursuit of happiness that our original Declaration of Independence asserted as our right with instead the pursuit of wealth, as protected by the property provisions in the Constitution of these states united that we actually ended up with once that first American War was over. I can't tell you how many of you have thanked me in response for this series for helping give you all hope, and I get that. I'm deeply moved by it, and I am frankly surprised at just how much hope doing the series has given me. It's only in contrast to where I started that I can even see just how hopeless I was feeling underneath. You know all those 5 disabling myths I partly built the shows around as a series of rebuttals? Well, they were also my beliefs. So great, so far so good. To take back our hope is to take back our power. To take back our hope is to take back our power. But that is not the end of this conversation. It is but the start. Tonight we build on all that has gone before to shape that start and insist upon its direction. So let me do that by bringing realistic back in, and in fact putting the question of what it means for us to be at the very center of our ongoing conversation. What does reality demand of us? I say that again. What is reality? What does reality demand of us? I have a friend who defines reality this way. She says, reality is what just happens anyhow, even when we don't believe it. She's a biologist and has a particular kind of handle on these things. Social life, politics and family and money and games and parties and having kids and laying down the law all happen inside a bigger set of systems that we live in and on and at the behest of, even if we're almost always too busy with our daily lives to notice. But it's always there, anyhow, enabling us constantly in ways we mostly take for granted, with rarely a thank you, and constraining us in ways we do usually notice and get all upset about. So that's the first thing about reality. Whenever we're trying to make something happen, socially or politically or economically or personally, we need to check whether it is physically or biologically or humanly possible. It also helps to check whether it's legally and financially possible. Those are man-made things. That's where reality gets such a bad name, the dismal science, where we've been told ever since we were kids, it's almost always about what we cannot do, what won't work, what is not allowed. Be realistic from our youngest years almost always meant quit wanting that, imagining that, or trying to make that happen. To do our work here, we need a grown-up notion of what it means to be realistic. It certainly cannot mean that if an enterprise is hard and there are constraints upon it, that we shouldn't take it on. It just means that we are responsible for doing all we can to know what the constraints are and to build them into our design specifications, taking them into account whenever we're trying to figure out the best design for something. And being realistic also means knowing not only where things can go wrong, but where and how they can go right, or are already going right, searching carefully, and with all the rigor and precision we can muster for the best opportunities and figuring out what to do with those opportunities. If we seek to save the world by changing it, and we do, and we must, then that means we must seek to understand all we can about the systems we have to transform. We must map them and their points of greatest leverage. We need to question what outcomes might result from specific changes at those critical points, individually and together, and in what sequence. We're looking for what campaigns and strategies have the greatest likelihood of resulting in the large-scale, radical systems changes that realism demands of our future. That is the future we need, the very point of our series. Not the future we want, not a future up for grabs, nor do I mean laying on some specific vision on that future. The future will sort itself out to the extent that we manage to leave them the means to do so. But I do mean the criteria, the goals that our own actions now must indeed aim for if the future others inherit will give them the best chances for making it and even more. Tonight then I want to focus on 3 sets of questions regarding the reality with which we must all now cope. First, is there a future now coming into being that could meet our needs to survive and to thrive, and to restore our planet that seems fully viable? And on what basis might we justify such a claim? The second question, what is a plausible strategy for getting from here to there, given that what are arguably the most powerful forces on the planet today will mostly oppose the changes we're talking about? And finally, given who I am, what I care about, what my circumstances are and my resources, both social and material, how might I make the most of my own opportunities and efforts in service of the above? Before we get into these 2 questions, I need to say 2 more things. First, to say that the future we need is entirely viable and fully doable is absolutely not to say that doing it will be easy in any sense of that word. Not only will they be shooting at us, so to speak, and what it takes radically and successfully to overhaul entire social systems and end up actually much better off than you started is anything but easy. In fact, it really is rocket science. That doesn't mean that only rocket scientists can do it. It does mean that just as when we got a man on the moon, tens of thousands of people, and of course here we're talking more like millions, must each be doing their small and quite distinctive parts, and often in a given order. And they all need to be able kind of to see the big picture and know what we're doing, how it fits in, and how it goes together with what others are doing. And we all have to believe in it, as many of us quite passionately. It also means that there's a lot of ways to get this work wrong, and even take out millions of people in the process if we get it wrong, as human history makes so abundantly clear. But then again, it does not always end badly. Far from it. Many of the countries of the world today are greatly better off than they started, having gone through changes of the magnitude we'll be talking about tonight. And at least 5 of these countries did seem to have gotten it stunningly right, landing over the past decades always at the top of any measure of human well-being by country. So when we get to the how-to question, we need to study more closely how the Scandinavians did their revolutions and pulled it off some 90 years ago. They moved the oligarchy out of power. My last thing before we turn to our 3 questions is simple. Tonight is the end of the series, but it is not the end of the conversation. It is its start. As handy reference points for continuing issues and options and ideas for those conversations, I've pulled together a visual, a map to which I've given the name Mapping the Movement. We'll walk through this map tonight as we talk our way around the 3 questions. Starting at the top with the first part of the first question, is there a future now coming into being that could meet our needs to survive and to thrive and to restore our planet that seems fully viable? And the simple answer is yes. The way I got this part of the map was as I looked over all the earlier shows and related research and websites, articles, experiences, I noticed that certain terms kept reappearing, usually seen as movements. These included what I call do-it-ourselves democracy, more participatory, more problem-solving, resilient communities, regenerative economy, a regenerative agriculture, restorative justice, and restructured approaches to global security. Behind these 7 movements, something even more profound seems to be happening. Not only do these labels name new ways of doing things that are arising all over the world, but they're also the fruit of movements that aim to make these new practices already well proven and expanding rapidly in use into the way the world of the future will actually live, how the system will work. Taken together, they really are kind of a rough draft of our future. Not a statement of needs and demands, not a theory, not an ideology, or even a set of ideals, but a set of living practices that are actually transforming our future. And taken together, they are the next system, the Next Systems Project, and the Transforming Capitalism course that we've talked about. And so many rigorous big picture thinkers are out there trying to map out. As the next system, they do in fact show every promise of meeting all the, if you will, system requirements that our future demands. I call all this the convergence, because it is a convergence of global answers that work. Nobody planned them out, but together they start looking like indeed the future we need, a viable one. There are of course many questions about the viability of what we've been looking at in this whole series, but the lively challenge, the assertion, but that is not realistic, universal as it is sometimes seems to be, is not actually about the viability of the future I'm describing in itself, not even its capacity to meet our real needs. It all the more promising as breakthroughs. Now, the question of viability is not about the feasibility or value of this future. It's about the impossibility of getting there. So then let us now turn our attention to that second question. What is a plausible strategy for getting from here to there, given that what are arguably the most powerful forces on the planet today will mostly oppose the changes we're talking about? First of all, as I've looked through the many potent forms of social change occurring over the world, that's far more than we can even mention tonight. But there are some key ideas. Here are some I've identified so far. I'm going to just mention the bottom 3. The conversion, which changes our feelings and thinking about the world, as with the gay rights movement of late, which can actually happen surprisingly fast, considering that people can hold these ideas for thousands of years and in a few years of honest connection and confrontation, change them. Conversations, reaching across our differences. And conscious living, as is showing up in changing our lifestyles, for example, with permaculture. Convergence we've just spoken of. Now I want to focus in on emergence. That's, of course, a notion in this case that has a popular meaning, but I want to focus on its technical meaning tonight. Let's start by jumping in and seeing what we can make of this video by the renowned systems theorist, Stuart Kauffman.
It's what I want to call a new, adjacent, possible, empty ecological niche. Because some worm or some bacterium could evolve to live only in swim bladders. Agree?
Sure.
I'm going to come back to that. But let me go to my third question, which I always go to. Do you think you could say ahead of time all possible Darwinian pre-adaptations? Well, we all agree no. And I think there's deep reasons for it. But just briefly, how would you list all possible selective conditions? How would you know you'd listed them all? How would you state ahead of time the features that might become pre-adaptations? Well, we can't. And that requires more discussion, but in fact we can't. This means something huge before I get back to my surprise point. It means that not only do we not know what will happen, like when you flip a coin 10,000 times, and you don't know if it'll come up heads 4,423 times. We don't even know what can happen in the evolving biosphere and in the economy and in life. And that means something huge for us as humans. It means that reason is an insufficient guide for living your life. It means we need reason, emotion, intuition, sensation, metaphor. It means what just happened to the Enlightenment, where reason is our hero, okay? It's insufficient. Life is much richer than we thought. Now I want you to see what stunned me. Let's come back to the swim bladder being an adjacent possible empty niche. Again, could a worm or a bacterium come to live in it? Yeah. Okay? Now, did natural selection probably act on a population of fish to make a functioning swim bladder? Sure, probably it did. Here's my surprise question. Did natural selection act to create the swim bladder as a new niche? No.
Impossible. Yeah.
It acted to make a functioning swim bladder,
Right.
not a new niche. But we've just agreed that the new niche is a new direction of evolution of the biosphere. Right?
Right.
This means something that stuns me. It means that without any selection doing so, the biosphere is creating its own future possibilities of becoming. I'm going to say it again. The biosphere, honest to God, without any selection, is creating its own future possibilities of becoming. That's not in Darwin. Now,
And
that's emergence.
radical emergence.
It's a radical emergence. I'm glad you used the word radical emergence because A, we couldn't prestate it, B, we don't know how it happened, and B, it changed the course of evolution. Now, just briefly, the same thing happens in the economy. I won't go into cases, but nobody foresaw Facebook when the computer was invented. So go from computer to personal computer to Microsoft to saving and storing files to the web to selling things on the web to Facebook. How'd that happen? These all got enabled by and were new economic niches that were created by what happened beforehand, becoming into the adjacent possible. It's radical emergence, Robert. It's radical emergence. It cannot be deduced. In principle, it can't be deduced.
Stuart Kaufman himself is the one who actually coined the term adjacent possible, and now he's trying hard to explain it to us all. It didn't used to mean all that much to me, used in its original context of biological evolution, but gradually as I've come to see just how much it applies to cultural evolution, to the radical transformation of social systems, I'm starting to see just how mind-blowing it really is. So much so that I'm taking up our scarce time with it in this last show. As I understand it, it means something like this. The adjacent possible is what becomes possible, though entirely unpredictable, when factors that simply never existed before showed up and start opening things up. They become components in unexpected combinations elicited by the dynamics of the moment. Some of these can prove to be pivotal in opening up whole new spaces for innovations that can ratchet society up to new forms and achievements never before imagined. The best example I have of that is what is going on in Taiwan today, something almost entirely new, as we saw in the 6th show, and working in so many promising ways to make democracy truly inclusive, wise, thoughtful, and operating at a scale even in the hundreds of thousands, and right alongside it, as transformative as can be, is a true revolution, without a shot fired or a fist raised. There's not time to finish out the video tonight from last time as I'd hoped, but even to explain it all is doing, you will find it on our website. Here's a key factor in that revolution. It just happened by accident, the surprise success that has characterized almost all real revolutions. When they actually happen, no one expected it at that moment. What made this one work so well, the Occupy action that actually resulted in successful systems change, was the quiet groundwork that had gone on for 2 full years ahead of that time. During that time, dedicated hacktivists, they call themselves, developed the GovZero software. It was this software that made possible a revolutionary new way that could engage hundreds of thousands of people in meaningful dialogue and decision-making, and then lo and behold, right around the time they had finished the development of the software, the Sunflower Movement, entirely unexpectedly, took over the capital in Taipei for 3 weeks. But they had then the tools they needed because of their faith, as one might see it, had gone ahead and done the work of emergence, pulling together all these possibilities that only existed before as strands Now it's coming into how to do government differently, successfully. Will that new approach last? We don't know. Is there now an adjacent possibility never there before? One realizing the ideals of a livable world with a truly functional democracy? All of a sudden, I understand why my sense of a livable future has been increasingly real to me. I think now it's because it exists in that very space. And here are all my reasons why, all the never before factors that are now part, just out of the corner of our eyes, beckoning us into radical transformation. My list of some 7 singularities, one-of-a-kind things, some very good, some terrible, that are now here, didn't used to be here at all, and put together are yielding endless new possibilities from which we might yet make a new kind of world. Do or die necessity, the mother of invention, the first one. Global norms and ideals without precedent, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Never had that before. High tech, father of invention maybe? Global access to knowledge and each other through it. Knowledge of systems theory and its relations to ecology and human systems, how they really work. Growing knowledge of humans, our needs, our gifts, our healing, our constraints. Proven patterns for getting along with each other. Emergence of proven solutions and a learning society across all sectors. What does this come down to? I mean, what can you make out of something you cannot even imagine yet? Going back to Taiwan and listening to what another emergence theorist has said in all this, he said, chance favors the connected mind. To which I find myself wanting to add, chance favors the connected mind, and the would-be revolution that has been preparing itself for the day the Berlin Wall might fall, even though no one really knew it would, as Otto Scharmer kept telling us last month. Before we leave this level of top aspiration, the part of the movement map that deals with what actual transformation of society could look like, a truly viable future, I just want to hark back for a moment to Buckminster Fuller's famous advice that is especially relevant here. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So we must get out of our way to believe in, prepare for, and help make happen this very concrete, emerging new world. But how? By seeing how all the pieces are related and building these possibilities, this emerging new world, into our stories. Whatever the issues are we're focusing on, we have that larger context. You'll find that on the left and side of the movement map I've drawn, which is, by the way, on our website, just click on the hexagon on the circle for the 7th show. And of course, there's one other way I haven't yet mentioned to bring into being a livable future that really works and is here to stay, the one attracting tens, even hundreds of thousands worldwide. Just start living the future today. I'm not just saying be the change, though I am saying that. If you are among those fortunate enough to be able to realign your whole way of living, or have grown up in those ways already, then you've embraced the most fundamental path, that actually of the anarchist, who does not wait on governments or the revolutions overthrowing governments, they just start doing it. Beyond that, however, when at least some of what such citizens are doing is not just moving outside the systems and living, but to live a new way of doing government, a new way of doing education in radical changes, as we saw Audrey Tang and his hacktivists doing in Taiwan. That's what I mean when I say be the future. We're now forced back to the second half of the second question. What are the plausible strategies for getting from here to there and this half, given that what are arguably the most powerful forces on the planet today will mostly oppose the changes we're talking about? It's not a walk in the park. It's not even a vast project to put on the man on the moon. It is a kind of battle, a war for our very souls, our very future. To be fought, of course, non-violently, for that is the only way we can fight it. To do anything else is to perpetuate the very systems we are trying to dismantle, to lose an effect before we've even begun. So here's where realism, the very idea of it, must really grow up, must come into its full force. Realism has always cautioned us when we seek to create the best, to also prepare for the worst. And as I've struggled with this over the years, here's where I've landed. In fact, what doing this series has brought me to, the stakes and now the hopes that are so high, if we really start to succeed, so imminent, that we, in creating the best, have not only to prepare for the worst, but strategically, as much as we can, we have to anticipate the moves those in power, the moneyed interests will make, even before it starts. All of which brings me down to what on the map and in the movement and in the most realistic strategic dimension of our work, I've come to call the three foundations, the preconditions, which we must somehow, in solidarity as far as the eye can see, make happen. Because without these three changes, these three preconditions, nothing else will actually happen on the scale needed. To change our world then, here they are. They're all intended, taken together, to take out the oligarchy, or at least cut back on its power. The obvious moves to this end are the ones we see on the bottom right of the map. If we could somehow pull them off, they're mostly the agenda of Les Leopold and his nationwide effort to reverse runaway inequality. If you saw the second half of our last month's 6th show, you'll remember Eve Major, the Northern California organizer whom we have interviewed. Les's idea is basically get out the story, get out the truth, train tens of thousands of people to tell the critical truth. And if we cannot outlaw corporate wrongdoing, we must even more fundamentally restructure our political parties so that we, the people, can turn around and change the laws that will then take corporations out of power. That is the start of the really tough strategic conversation that we'll be getting into, and in the next half hour of the show that will be aired separately, we're going to move back into also the space of what does this mean to us personally in our own hearts and growth. Thank you so much for being part of the show this very last series and all the time you've been there making this happen.